So I think today we should talk a little bit about, because the whole last episode was about like TV story and movie stories and stuff. And I know a lot of people do like the idea of, maybe the fantasy is to see your work on TV or in a movie theater. And so what would that adaptation process be like? We had somebody in the Stone Table, just to kick this off, who was, well, several people. It was a discussion about adaptation. And I know that one person said specifically, it was a totally different story. Not totally different. Like the hook is the same, the premise is the same in general, but they had to adapt it because it wasn't something like, it was a new art form, I guess. Like the book has to necessarily be a different art form from like the screenplay. So,
Well, do you want to kind of pick apart the invasion journey so far? Because that had a few stages, and then we got feedback the last time that we talked that was kind of interesting.
yeah. So to preface that, we're shopping an invasion production deal right now. So that may not be something that we've talked a lot about. We actually sold an option, which is marching, I think, in the right direction for Fat Vampire, but also Invasion. So I think that's what we want to talk a little bit about, is the process of getting that going. Actually, in the last episode, I mentioned Colony. That's the reason I was watching Colony, was to see how different it was from Invasion, which the answer is very. So
Right, but okay. So more specifically, there, we were asked to watch Colony. Only half of us have been good boys so far and started, but we were asked to watch Colony because that's the number one thing that people are going to ask. So that's something to keep in mind. Rule one, if you're
well, actually, I will add, we were asked to watch two things. Do you remember the other one?
I feel like I really should.
The other was called Falling Skies. And the reason that that's significant is because Colony is live now. People are going to ask about Falling Skies. How is it different from Falling Skies? But Colony was, I mean, Dave just told me on the last episode that they were canceling Colony. But as far as like when we originally started talking about this, that was a show that was in production right now. And so it was important that we figure out how to answer the question of how is ours different.
So, so you do want to be aware of that. Like what is out there right now? How is yours both the same and different? Because the fact that there are alien shows out there is a good thing. It means people want to see aliens. They're curious about that. So what shows have succeeded? Why have they succeeded? How is yours different? How is it going to pull in the successful things that people like about alien invasion shows? And how is it going to avoid the things that get them canceled? So like, that's really good to start with. Now, we didn't do that before we watched, or before we started adapting Invasion. We just adapted Invasion. And that was something that if we're in pitch meetings, we need to be able to be fluent and have those conversations. So it was something to pay attention to. But as far as our original adaptation, we had to kind of look at Invasion as a whole series and say, what is the best way to adapt this? If we want to go shop this as a commercial property, do we want to think about it as a series of movies, or do we want to think about it as television, or how do we want to approach this? And to my mind, it was really simple, because we're never going to get 7 books out of, like, there's never going to be 7 Invasion movies. It's not that big of a franchise. Like, it's just not.
It's easily as big as Harry Potter.
Right. It's not the kind of thing that will command 7 movies, but could it command 6 or 7 seasons of television? Yeah, I could totally
6 or 7 seasons of television in a market that right now is getting hungrier and hungrier for content. I mean, Look at all these new streaming platforms opening up with new venues and channels, and the fact that I feel like everybody's run out of ideas. What is it I heard recently that they were remaking again? I forget what it was. There was something that...
I don't know. You could have said that sentence at any time in the last several years.
Yeah, I feel like it was another thing. And it was whatever it was not remade that long ago. And it's just like, are there no good ideas? It feels like people my age in our 40s grew up and said, hey, all that shit we had as kids, why don't we just do that again? Just press repeat. Let's give them all our shit.
Something I've wondered about, because like I hear about projects being bought and development hell and all these things, like how often is a company just buying an idea is almost like
Often.
a story starter instead of like, we're not going to be true to this at all. We just want an idea we could fuck around with and make into our own thing, palatable for
Well, yeah,
viewing audience.
it's a little bit like I know everyone is very sick of me talking about salt, sugar, fat, probably, but that book is kind of amazing. And there's a part in it where it's the turning point for the food companies, because they start selling, basically, instead of it an idea starting with the food scientists, where in this analogy it would be the storytellers, it started with the marketing department, right? So the marketing department says, hey, you know what we could sell? We could sell Rice Krispie Treats cereal. We could sell the shit out of that. And the food scientists are like, we don't know how to make that. That's ridiculous. Make it. Figure out a way, because we're going to sell that. And I think that that's kind of way the Hollywood engine is very much like that sometimes, where, okay, here's an idea. We can sell this idea. Let's go make that idea. And it's just a very different way to approach story.
Yeah. Well, so continue the story of Invasion. So basically we did decide to go with TV, but in a really specific, I actually don't know where this idea came from. If this was something that you had or something, but I know that the original, so basically Invasion is a 7-book series, and we decided, and when I say we, I mean not involving me, so it was some party outside of me, but I love the approach, is that the first movie ends up being basically a double-length pilot. I'm sorry, the first episode.
Yeah, that came because this was always a pilot in my head. So the original version of Invasion was not me and Johnny. It was actually me and Dave, and it was just a pitch. We were meeting with 47 North to pitch them some ideas. They liked Z2134 and they liked Monstrous. This one didn't go anywhere. And when Johnny and I were wanting to write an alien invasion story, this one was like, all right, well, what do you think of this? And that just kind of worked out. But I always thought of this as a pilot. And the I don't want to spoil what happens at the end of Invasion, but what happens at the end of Invasion was always, I mean, it was there in that original first pitch that we gave to Amazon. That was always like, okay, that's how the pilot would end. And so it was really easy, once we already had that book, to think in terms of, okay, that's still a pilot, but Contact, the second book, has a lot of space, and it has a lot of world building. It has a few months period of time, but it also has stretches of land, and there are people who are in control of this area or this area, and that's the kind of thing you need for more of a sprawling seasonal narrative. So then it just became a matter of, okay, well, the first book that neatly aligns with a pilot. Like we'll adapt that as a pilot episode.
It makes it sets the stage. It basically says, so the thing I will spoil that happens at the end of Invasion, because it isn't that much of a spoiler, we've talked about it a lot, is that you don't even see the aliens. Like they basically take the first book to arrive, and it's more about the people and what happens. So if the series is, because this full series is about this, the progress of this alien invasion and what happens. I'm sorry, not alien invasion, this alien occupation, say, and what happens. But the aliens have to be there for that. So the pilot serves the purpose. It does the things that a pilot needs to do really well, I think, is it, number one, establishes that, like I said, setting the stage, meaning the aliens need to arrive. They need to do what they're going to do. But second, it evokes like the hook. That's like, okay, something's going on here. So the thing that Sean's talking about that he doesn't want to blow is the sort of thing that, like, okay, we knew the aliens were coming, but then when this happens, it's like, oh, there's some weird shit going on. There's something else happening as well. And so that's what the first episode, the first book, which became the first episode, does. And then the rest of season 1 is what currently is book 2. So books 1 and 2 comprise the entire first season of TV. So it'd be like 6 seasons of TV instead of 7.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'd be 6 seasons of TV. And so we had to do, when we prepared this for television, or I guess to shop for television, we needed several different elements. So first we needed a script, and then we needed a full series treatment that basically says, hey, here's what each of the seasons would be about. And those amounted to a page each. We needed Um, we needed a one-page treatment on the pilot, and then we needed a full treatment for the second season. I'm sorry, the first season, but the second book, but episode to episode to episode. So when it came to season 1, that would be Contact. We broke it down into 10 episodes. So we took the major events in Contact and thought, okay, what would be a really interesting way to frame this out? Here's, because different characters have different needs, right? So in a book, you just do it through POV shifts, but in a series, maybe it's character-centric episodes or something. Like maybe this one, it has to be in the bunker because of whatever reason. But you're always kind of moving between the different locations, and it just feels more like television. So you've got this, you basically have like A story, B story, C story, and they're all kind of weaving in and out of each other. And you try to get that into a Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4 that's just in like a couple paragraphs per episode. And then we did spend some time on the script because that, they didn't.
It was more important to have a script done than that it be the script that was used.
Right, exactly. Because the first thing that people ask is there a script? Like that's the very first question. So being able to say yes kicks that ball forward. And so the first thing our partners were going to need to do was to get a script made. So we just decided to write that script because like we don't have ego about it like at all. We were just trying to help. Like let's get the script done, and then if they need to rewrite something 100%, it doesn't really matter because we'll really fast. We'll be able to assign that to somebody else, and they could, because we don't care. We don't care at all. But we also like the process of writing scripts. It is a lot of fun to pass them back and forth, and it is fun to adapt our own work and kind of be familiar with our words in a way where we're having to refine them and really drill down. So we did that with the script, and I think it's kind of funny because I don't think they really expected anything from the script at all, because writing a novel is very different from writing a script. And when we said, yeah, we'll have the script to you in a week or so, we'd spend a couple weeks on it, and I think the feeling was a little bit like, oh well, thank you very much, that'll be awesome, we'll get that rewritten as soon as possible. Like that was pretty much the unspoken exchange. But then it was awesome when it was being read, we kept getting emails during the reading. Holy fucking balls, this is awesome. So I think we did a decent job getting that script done. But then they went and shopped it, or actually not shopped it yet, really, getting feedback from other people before it gets shopped. And Johnny, do you want to talk a little bit about what that feedback was on the script? Because I think it's really interesting as far as this kind of adaptation.
Yeah, this is actually where I was thinking you were going to go. So this is good. I mean, we couldn't help but think of the Invasion script as an interpretation of the events that occur in Invasion. So, which seems very logical, right? Like, so we'll just, okay, so what's the movie version of this? And there are certain things you need to do to make a movie version of something, or a visual version of something that you can't do it, like the different media, book versus TV, which is what I was saying at the beginning, but that's not actually what I'm talking about here. It was more like just blow by blow, like this occurs and this occurs, and you may shift modalities, but it's still just a recounting of the events that were in the original. And what the feedback was, which is spot on, is that just a minute ago I was saying that a pilot should set the stage as far as what kind of needs to occur, but also establish a hook, like this is different, this is what this show is going to be about. And what our script didn't do as well as a pilot should is to take the next step and really demonstrate what the series was going to be about. So just as a very simple example, we mentioned that they asked us to watch Colony, and in the Colony pilot we learn something, like a lot of it is under-explained, which is actually a good thing. You don't want to over-explain, but there there's this big wall around a section of LA, and people are riding around on bikes, and there's these cars with these weird sirens and the red hat.
loved all of that world building.
And they don't explain it really. You
Right.
just, I mean, you know that it's bad, right? You just
how many episodes in before you start getting details on that stuff?
Well, you still don't know who the aliens are. I'm like episode 8 or 9. You still don't know who the aliens are, why they arrived, what they want, what they're doing with the people who are disappearing, being shipped out. You don't know any of that. But you do know, you get the feeling of like everything is being rationed and controlled. So I assume that's why everybody's on bikes. Like gas must not be as easy to come by. I don't know. But the point is, it established that you were going to be following basically, and then you got a little bit of a feel of like the power imbalance that exists within the colony. Like there are some human collaborators who have basically, found their seat of power, and they're gonna, like, you could tell that there was going to be that
characters.
Yes, but deliberate. Like Baltar was a coward, and he just kind of like, he didn't know what to do, and he went with whoever was in charge. These guys would do that, but it's more deliberate. It's a little bit like it's a comment on humanity too, one that Dave would agree with. But
I thought Gaius was pretty realistic.
True. But my point is,
you saw Gaius as the everyman, right?
The everyman.
Yes.
Is that what it does is it establishes all those things about what is going to happen in that first season and so on. Like you learn that these aren't spoilers, but there's a resistance, that there's these parties in control, that there's a human government. We don't see like an alien government, but that they're answering from the aliens on high. All these sorts of things.
A little V-like?
It's yes, it is V-like. So I think that the creators of Colony probably got asked, how is this different from V? And I'm not even kidding you, because it is V-like in that way. So as a matter of fact, Colony is more like V than we're like Colony. So that's good.
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask that.
Yeah, but my point is that it really says, the pilot says this is what the series is going to be like. Like it really does. And
should you have a flash forward in it? And slowly work towards that flash forward moment.
We could.
Well, that like, feels a little
different.
That feels a little sledgehammery to me. I think that's the non-subtle way to do it. This is more like, I mean, we may have had to do. Well, let me get to the point, and then we can talk about ways we might have done it. Because the nature of invasion, the nature of Colony is that it's already set up, and those dynamics, those power struggle things, like that is what at least the first season is about. In Invasion, the first episode is about the arrival of the alien ships, and when I say arrival, they don't even arrive until the end. It's them coming to us. Maybe
we should have called that first book Arrival.
We could have. I hear that's a good title to use. And so the feedback, circling all the way back, was that the pilot didn't do a good enough job of saying what the series was going to be about, because the series isn't about ships arriving. It isn't about people fighting with one another and divulging into animalistic, survival behavior. It's about evolution, and it's about the way that the aliens have been back a bunch of times. Like it's this ancient alien sort of thing. And there's a lot of like interplay between the aliens in the past and humans now, and thought and memory. And we hadn't hinted at any of that because it didn't exist. Like it didn't exist for us as creators because we hadn't written it yet. We didn't know it was coming, and it didn't exist in the timeline. So in order to be able to do that, do you remember what our ideas were? Because it was a little flash forward, but it was more subtle than that. It was more like, it was a flash backward that we thought we might like the last time the aliens were there is how maybe we'd start.
We talked about like I think it was like a shot over ancient Egypt, but it looked brand new. Right? So the pyramid is there, but it's not old, and the ship is just leaving. I think we were talking about it just leaving because then we know, and then it just says however many thousand years later, and then we open in New York, because that would be an instant way of saying there's more to this world than because we just open. It's a book. A book has a fundamentally different tool set than a television show, so it's more visual. It's more.
But there's lessons that can be learned back and forth here. So, like, I think if we were to write Invasion again, I would find ways to tip our hats to the stuff that's going to happen later in the series so that they don't need to just follow us from A to Z. They kind of know what's coming in a little bit. but yeah, that was interesting, trying to figure out how to do that.
Did you think anything was like especially hard about adapting it, or did you find it was a really natural adaptation? It was only when they said, "Hey, wait a minute, guys, you do more world building stuff in here."
Well, I mean, you did most of the adaptation, but as far as when I was going through, it's nothing stuck out. And when I was refining, it was just trying to get information better conveyed in shorter periods of time, that sort of thing. But I wasn't fundamentally changing the nature of the information, which is actually where I started this whole thing when I was talking about the discussion in Stone Table. Somebody had said when I did an adaptation for my thing, it became very different because it's just the tool sets are too different. You can't take, like, for instance, a literary novel, not that this was, and things with internal dialogue. Like, you can't just have somebody sitting around with their thumb under their chin saying, I will be thinking about these things for the next 15 minutes. Like, it just doesn't work that way. You have to create a totally different thing.
Okay, well, what do you think is the best way to, and Dave might have fun with this, to take, because no show ever knows, because we talked about this a little bit on that conversation, the hard part of making a pilot like that when the show isn't really developed, like now, if we were going to write Invasion as a pilot and we already had that feedback that we got, we would approach it differently. But we didn't know, so we were just kind of doing a straight adaptation. But we couldn't have made that book. Like, we have the luxury now that we're adapting it for television of knowing how all 7 books play out, that we could introduce some of that into Invasion, but we couldn't when we were writing it. So I think that that's the same argument you could make for pretty much any show. So Breaking Bad lasted 5 seasons. Now that if Vince Gilligan could go back to episode 1 and change things about the pilot that echoed, like, they didn't even know Jesse Pinkman was going to stick around. So obviously, if, Dave and I have said many times, we would love to go back to Yesterday's Gone and rewrite that. If we could go back to the very first episode, because now we actually know what happens and we know our characters and we know the show, what would a rewrite be? So are there examples of pilots that we could take and say, if the show creator could redo that pilot, or if we could redo that pilot, what elements would be introduced in that pilot that weren't actually in the pilot? Even something as simple as Friends. We've seen the Friends pilot a bunch of times, and it really is true to the show. But, for example, could there be a moment between Chandler and Monica in that very first pilot that signals that these people are going to someday end up together? Because they couldn't have known that then.
Yeah, see, I'm thinking something a little different. What you're describing is what we usually think of as like seeding, so reverse salting or something, where you're just adding in little teasers of things to come. I think it's more like, at least this is my understanding, is in Invasion, for instance, we wouldn't want to. I'll use the Friends example because I think that's more familiar to at least the people on this call. Not to those young whippersnappers out there who can't stand the laugh track, but I wouldn't put a moment between Chandler and Monica if they didn't control the entire series and know for sure that was going to happen. But here's what they needed. They needed Ross and Rachel because they knew that was going to happen. They needed all 6 friends to have a certain banter because they knew that was going to be repeated. So I think that when they were asking us to draw out some elements that would continue in Invasion, I don't think it's that this one event would occur or that this tablet would be revealed later unless it was like a key thing. It's more that the sprawling nature of it, the aliens coming back, it's like a bigger picture question than some specific detail, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. But what do you think are the most significant things that change for, okay, no, here's a better question. What do you think stands in a creator's way when they're trying to adapt? Now, I actually don't think we have this problem. I think that we really understand, here's the thing that we made over here, and if we're moving it over to this context, there are things that we're going to sacrifice. There are things that are going to be better than our vision, and there are things that aren't going to quite match our vision, and we have to be okay. But when we're making that translation, what do you think would hold us back, and what do you think would hold most authors back if they're adapting their work?
I think most authors probably, I mean, this might not be true anymore. I think a lot of authors are more adaptive these days, but I think the cliche of authors not wanting their work changed at all does have some relevance. And like, this is a story as it is, and that's it. And
like they just get precious with the ideas, that the ideas themselves aren't fluid. It's like, this was my vision, and it's cast in there.
Yeah, and I think you have to, if you're going to go into TV or movies, you have to go more with the spirit of the thing rather than what it is. You have to adapt. You have to find the elements that are most representative of what you're trying to do with what they can do within those limitations.
Okay, so Dave, let's stick with you for a moment, because you are a little more pure artist, right?
Yes.
So I'm right with you. Like, I on one hand, I very much appreciate that a visual medium is different and that it's going to be interpreted. But on the other hand, I'm a custodian for our art, and I want to make sure that it ends up in the right places. Dave and I took a phone call several years ago with a production company who wanted to shop Yesterday's Gone to television. And by television, I mean regular television, not HBO, this was pre-Netflix, actually. I mean, pre-Netflix the way we know Netflix now. So, and the TV deals were just a little bit different. So back then it was like HBO or, cable, or, ABC or NBC, and there's no way, or CW. Like, can you imagine the Yesterday's Gone, the CW version of Yesterday's Gone, where,
Mauricio's cheating on me.
It would just be, I actually kind of want to write this.
Beer batter bananas.
Oh my God. Yeah, they would cast like Luke Perry as,
I would find an interesting way. I would find that an interesting challenge to do that, but I wouldn't be averse to it. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, okay, at the time we both were. We were like,
yeah.
Like, no way, Mauricio's no way, because that was the argument. If Yesterday's Gone goes over to the network, then no matter what, it has to fundamentally change what it is because of this character. Do you still feel that way? Or if, let's say, NBC wanted to put on a Yesterday's Gone show, would you entertain that?
Well, first I'd be concerned that they would cancel it too early, because NBC's done that with like every favorite show I've ever had. Yeah,
NBC would for sure cancel Yesterday's Gone.
I think television's getting a little more. They're getting a little darker, and they're willing to take more chances, I feel. So I would consider it more than I would have like 5-6 years ago. I think I always would have considered it for a cable network back then.
Yeah, I would have considered it for cable, but network is just hard. So would you then?
There are things I would be willing to change some things. I'm not like, because I think about like something like The Walking Dead, which is different than the comics, and so how it's its own thing. And I think two things can exist in the same universe that don't have to be the exact same. And you might have opportunity, like there's things that I kind of wish we had done with Yesterday's Gone that you might be able to do in television. So yeah, I'd be game for that.
Yeah, I think
you'd have to get rid of the necrophilia scene, obviously, but
really, because I think that's a central episode. Like, just as written, Dave, as written. But so, okay, is there anything that you wouldn't at least entertain at this point? Because I think that's a valuable question too. If you're talking about adaptation, is there at least anything that, if somebody did say, you know what, we do want to make Yesterday's Gone on the CW, is that something that you would actually be curious to hear that more, because you would be curious to see how that might affect your life financially and how it might open other creative doors for you, so it's a concession you're willing to make? Or would you see it as, no, I'm genuinely curious to see how they would interpret that, and maybe there is some value?
I would be genuinely curious, because there's a part of me that would like to see Yesterday's Gone on a smaller, more intimate scale than a giant thing. Like, I think it could work in a different sort of way, and very character driven, because I think the core is there, and I think it could be done. So
yeah, I'd be real curious. I never
it would
actually
be
thought
different.
of
Like if we had written this elaborate like Game of Thrones style fantasy series, then I would probably be a lot more precious with it than I am with what we have done.
Yeah, I agree. I think with Yesterday's Gone, they'd be more inclined to buy it as a world and characters, and just think, okay, we're basically buying a premise, we're buying a handful of characters, and then we're going to do something with them. And they'll probably have, they would cast some like, what's his name, Ian Somerhalder.
Yeah.
That would be the Barizio, right? It would be like this very pretty Danger Boy. And it's fine. Like, it would have something, it would be tonally different, but I think that it could still have a huge fan base. And I think that it's just really interesting when you're considering adapting your work. I think the very best way that you could go about that is to be as open-minded as possible, and to not really confine yourself as to, this is what I created, so this is what it will have to be. And the Invasion process has been very much like that. And we started out with, okay, here's our conception. We have these 7 books, but from the very beginning, it was, okay, I'm going to hand these over. We're going to make this. We're going to spread it out. We're going to make it, 6 seasons instead of 7 books. But I have a feeling that by the time we're actually watching this on television, it's going to be a very different thing. And you can already see it. Every single step that we've had so far has drifted a little bit further from the source material. And I think that by the time, either we have another scriptwriter who's redoing the pilot, it could be something completely different. And I'm just thoroughly okay with that. I'm just excited to see that ideas that we had are now being moved to a different arena.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that understanding that the script is going to necessarily need to adapt. This is actually a really bad example, because I actually hate this adaptation, and I think that it's stupid and they should have done it another way. But it's a really clear example. Is World War Z, which was one of my favorite books, and the movie is just another zombie movie, and who gives a shit? And it has none of what made the book special. The book is really, really good, because the book is an oral history, and it just would have been hard to adapt. And they could have done something. They probably could have done TV with it or something, but they had to make us. It's a little like my original pitch for Dead City, where you're like, really cool concept. What's the story? And so they had to create a story, and because they wanted to be a blockbuster, how about Brad Pitt? And that character exists in the book, but barely. He's just one of like many storylines, and he doesn't do any of the shit that they have him do. So they had to modify it, because it couldn't sprawl like a book. And I think that's maybe an extreme example of the sort of thing that you need to understand when you're.
But then you get in the question, like that's just an odd situation, because they're clearly buying the name brand, but then they're not really doing anything with
right. That's why
brand.
That's such an extreme example. I couldn't think of a less extreme example where something was just really hard to convey in some way, or it took too long to convey, and so they needed to. Can you think of a good example where the book was very, very...
Okay, this might be a great micro conversation to end on, but how are you feeling? How do you think they'll do with the House of Leaves adaptation? Because that is very literary, right?
Yeah, although I got to say, did you read the script?
No, I didn't read the script.
Yeah, the script is very much... Dave, you gave us that link. Did you read the script?
No, I haven't read the book yet.
It's very much in the spirit.
That's why I didn't read the script either.
Very much in the spirit of the book. Very, very much.
Do you have to leave the theater and then go into another theater to watch 4 minutes and then go back to and then drive home and listen on your answering machine?
Actually, what happens is you're watching the movie in the theater, and then the people in the movie get into a theater and watch a movie, and then those people, yeah. No, but he, in the same way that the book is this surreal experience where it's kind of like you don't really know what's real and what's not. It's documentarian or whatever, where like the guy who discovers and is curating the papers, it's like you almost could believe that those papers are real, or that the guy is real, that who's curating them. And it's in the same vein, like the movie, like there's a note. It's fantastic. In the beginning, of the script, he has a few notes. Daniel Lewski does, the author of the book, who also wrote the screenplay. And he said, just a note on the talking head characters who will be in the because they do, the way they frame it is that they've discovered that House of Leaves, the book, this phenomenon that really exists in the real world, is a hoax because the author, Mark Danielewski, who is also a character in the pilot, I think it might be TV, he's a fraud because he discovered these papers and they're real. So he took it and made it his credit. And so they have all these people, like, imagine like a Michael Moore style documentary or any documentary where they're interviewing people talking about him and what he did. And his note says that these characters start to interact with the characters that are in the actual fictional part. And so you can just imagine the mind fuck of, like, the guy who's just discussing something that's supposed to be objectively about this material, and then he's interacting with the material. So it is, I mean, I really admired the way that he took the same feeling.
That's a lot of work. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good example of taking something and it's not verbatim at all, but it's spiritual.
But there are also scenes in this. So the character who, in the book, we get the story of him and his buddies going and discovering this trunk filled with the manuscript that is, it's a book about a book about a movie about people. Like, it's just this nested thing. And so they discovered these papers, and he's like the top level curator. But that story of him discovering the papers of this other guy who was curating the papers, that scene is in the pilot. And so you get them discovering the papers. So you get elements from the book, but then you also get this meta commentary on the book, which is cool. Well, anyway, so lots of differences between the two. So I don't know. I mean, I could keep going and going with this discussion, but they're different. Like, are there any closing notes to kind of not leave this just hanging?
No, I think I mean, as far as should you or should you not, I think that everybody should should at some point think about adaptation, even if they're not actually wanting to adapt their stories. And what I mean by that is, Dave and I started doing this very early, like post Yesterday's Gone, like White Space. And it was thinking, if this were going to be adapted, how would we approach it? Would we approach it any differently? And I remember, one of the set pieces we had for the original White Space was this big, giant, like military bunker type thing. And we got way away from that. It's a small island but that gave texture and character and shape to everything that we're doing, because the island itself is a petri dish. It became the story. But part of that, I mean, one of the best elements of that story came from us thinking about eventual adaptation. And hey, if this were going to be on television, what would it look like? What would it feel like? And we were watching The Killing at the time, which it was real rainy in Washington and kind of that mood setting. And it's really good to kind of think about your story in other contexts, because as authors, it's really easy to just get in our space and write, and with our doors closed and we're not getting out there. And even if you don't want to sell your work to TV, thinking about what it would be like on TV, I think is a great exercise to get more texture and character into what you're writing.
All right. Well, so that was the Story Studio. Who knows what we'll talk about next? We're freewheeling it here. So I guess we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening, and talk to you later.
Adios.
Worst show ever?
We're still recording.
Yeah.